So again, thank you very much, dear Professor, for having accepted the invitation and for the time and effort.
Thank you.
So I have a very brief introductory note about you, and then we will head on with the questions. So Professor Alexander Nehamas is a Greek-born American philosopher. He's a professor of philosophy and comparative literature in humanities at Princeton University, where he has taught since 1990. He works on Greek philosophy, aesthetics, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Michel Foucault, and literary theory, mainly. Among his books are Nietzsche as a Life as Literature, Virtues of Authenticity, Essays on Plato and Socrates, and Only Promise of Happiness, The Place of Beauty in a World of Art, on Friendship, and the book that we're going to basically focus on today, The Art of Living, Socrates, Socratic Reflections from Plato to Foucault. So my first question is a quote from the book, from the very beginning of the book. Philosophy in our time may have become a largely abstract discipline whose task is to solve or dissolve an equally abstract set of philosophical problems. But we must recognize that it was not always so, and it was especially not so for Plato. End of quote. What has changed?
First of all, 2,000 years have passed. But I think the most important change is the shift from philosophy as primarily a way of life, as opposed to primarily a theoretical discipline, to its becoming a profession. When the 18th century in Germany, the universities started having professors of philosophy, that removed, it had already been removed from this position that it had as a way of life by Christianity, because many of the activities that philosophers promoted and engaged in became practices of Christianity, and Christianity became the main counselor of Europe at the time for how to live one's life, rather than philosophy. The difference, to some extent, was that, there were many philosophical schools that are fighting with each other. Of course, Christianity started exactly that way too. There were all the various heresies that fought against each other. But once you had an orthodox theory or theology established, then that was it. That's how you lived your life, by and large, or you lived your life not like that, but pretended you were living it like that. So philosophy became, even in the Middle Ages, a more or less theoretical discipline that was an ancilla, an assistant to theology. With the Renaissance, when Platonism came back into European thought, we had the great early modern philosophers like Descartes and Spinoza, Leibniz, and eventually, of course, Kant. But from Kant on, and already earlier, philosophy had become an academic discipline. And that, I think, removed it. Well, removed it is not quite right, because it had already lost that position, but didn't allow it to take back the place that it had in antiquity. So, I don't think everybody in antiquity believed that philosophers lived the best life. Philosophers did, however. And on the basis of that notion, they felt that they could tell other people how to live as well. Contemporary philosophy is not like that at all. I mean, what you do in your study or in your office or in your classroom is by and large irrelevant to the kind of person you are. So we no longer claim for ourselves the privileged place among human lives, but we still try to tell people what to do. But we do it in such a way that nobody really listens, except for fields like practical ethics and applied disciplines of that sort.
Right.
But
sorry, just a bit later in the book, you just highlight what you already said, that the life of philosophy has gradually lost its exemplary status, and philosophy has increasingly recreated into its theoretical component. We no longer believe that the life of philosophers constitute a model that others should follow. This I suppose exactly what you were in the code, what you were just saying.
Right, but it's important to remember that not everybody agreed that philosophy was the best life. And Lucian, the ancient author, has a wonderfully funny dialogue where he shows all the philosophers fighting with one another about whether the Epicureans or the this or the that or the other is the right one. But there is definitely a difference between ancient philosophy and modern philosophy. I can't hear you.
Now
I can hear you.
You hear me? Okay, sorry. So since like in this book, Socrates' irony is so important to your conception of the art of living, you devote a part of your book to an examination of its various aspects. But your point of departure is Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain and the irony in it, especially in the superior relation of the readers of the character of the book Hans Castorp. This is of extreme importance to you as it enables you and your project to shed light not only on irony, but interestingly, on the question of deception. How is it? I mean, I know it's a very big question. You have devoted pages on that. But for especially, I mean, what intrigues me is this, the relation between irony and deception in that regard, because a large bulk of psychoanalysis has also worked on that, not only anthropology, but also psychoanalysis. You know, I just recently read a book, I think I have it here, Illness and Irony, you know.
I don't know that. Who's the guy?
It's from Michael Lambeck and Paul Entze.
Interesting.
It's interesting that they're also, even they quote you, they also they regard it as an important challenge in psychoanalysis, because, like, is it deception? Is it irony? So I would be thankful if you expand your inspiration from Thomas Mann's reading.
Well, I'm not sure that I will be very clear about that, because it's a complicated subject. Originally, in ancient Greece, aironeia, the A, which we translate as irony, was deception. It was almost straightforwardly a way to deceive other people. And I think the big change does come in with Socrates. Socrates uses irony without meaning to deceive, but he doesn't mean to deceive because he is already uncertain about the answer to the questions that he's asking about. When many people think that when Socrates says, I don't know what virtue is, you tell me, please, that he is more or less like a modern contemporary law professor. In law schools in America especially, they use what they call the Socratic method, which is to keep asking questions, but then the professor already knows the answer, you see. So there's no irony involved there. And many people think that Socrates was like that too, that he did know the answers, and that he wanted to show people that they didn't. My own view is that Socrates didn't know what virtue was. He thought that some people claimed they did, so he would ask them questions. And he very often would pretend, and that's where part of his irony resides, he would pretend that the people he was asking really did know the answer to the questions, but that they weren't willing to tell him, or something like that. That was crucial. And my sense that Socrates, as portrayed by Plato always, right, does not know the answers to his questions, I think makes his irony even more important than it would be otherwise. Because the amazing accomplishment of Plato is that it produces a picture of Socrates that all the ancient schools, except for the Epicureans, claimed as their first member. They all traced their ideas to him, which is very strange, because in Platonic dialogues, Socrates fundamentally cares about virtue, but there is also, the sense that you need a society that will bring you up and make you the right kind of person if you're going to be virtuous. Well, Antisthenes was Socrates' greatest friend, probably. And he too wrote dialogues, like all the people who were Socrates' friends and disciples. And he was a starter of cynicism, that the only thing that counted as virtue, nothing else in the world counted at all. And the perfect case of that is, of course, Diogenes the cynic, who was living in a barrel and did all those crazy things. And then Aristippus, another one, was a hedonist, thinking that pleasure was the best, and so on and so forth. So the amazing thing is that today, when we read the Platonic dialogues, there are about as many interpretations of Socrates from the dialogues as they were by the people who knew him, which suggests to me that Plato got it right. You see, that's what Socrates is, but who it is a mystery, because he himself didn't know how he was functioning the way he was. And I think Plato, when he writes his earlier dialogues, where Socrates is by far the protagonist, he himself doesn't know. Because Socrates faces Plato with three different ideas. One is, you have to be virtuous, a good person, if you're going to be happy. Secondly, if you know what virtue is, then you are virtuous. And third, I, Socrates, don't know what virtue is. But in Plato's eyes, Socrates managed to live the most virtuous life that he'd ever seen. So how is that possible if he believes those inconsistent three ideas? And Plato tries in his later dialogues, in one, he says, well, maybe he didn't have knowledge, but maybe you don't have knowledge. You don't need knowledge. You only need to believe correctly. And that gives you virtue. In another case, he says, well, maybe he did know it, and it was all inside the soul, and we forgot that knowledge when we were incarnated, when our souls entered our bodies. Maybe he wasn't that good. He tries each one of those three ideas. And in the end, I think, in the Republic, I think Socrates turns out to be a promising character, but there is serious criticism of him in the Republic. There's a serious criticism, for example, that he let people who were too young to engage in dialectic. And then Plato has this wonderful image where he says that he made people like little puppies that will bark and bite the pants of people as they come by them, rather than, make them the kind of virtuous philosophers that Plato would have liked. So ultimately, I think Socratic irony does not depend on deception. Let's see. If there is deception, maybe he's deceiving himself even. But I think he's genuinely, if not tortured, that may be too strong a word, he's genuinely concerned about who he is. And I think, at least as Plato depicts him, and I think Plato is very concerned about who Socrates was and what was it that made him possible.
Yet you see the traces of such a movement, or somehow a similar movement in Thomas Mann, right? In the novel.
Tell me more about that.
I mean, like the character thinks that he is not ill, but he's actually there in that mountain. He's
you're
going
very
to be
correct.
hospitalized.
You said he's there. You didn't say he's ill. And that, I think, is the issue. Is he or is he not? Is anyone up there ill?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these people, they drink like crazy. They eat a lot of food. They have sex with one another. They go into town and enjoy themselves. Where's the disease? Is it a physical disease, or is it a mental or a psychic disease? I think that's part of the irony of that book, is that you don't know whether, say, Hans Castorp's cousin Joachim, who is a very military person and loves to do his work, as at one point when he returns, he goes back to the flatland to serve, and then he gets sick again and comes back. And Hans Castorp asks himself, Was it the disease, or was it the smile, the laugh of the young Russian woman at the next table that brought him back? We don't know. And I think what's remarkable about Castrop, and I think he's been very unjustly criticized as a character, as being a kind of nothing, very much this, that. I think that the whole thing about Castrop is that he accepts that uncertainty. He accepts that uncertainty. He knows that it's not clear whether it's this way or that way. He weighs everybody. He listens to Zettembrini and Nafta and Claudia and Peppercorn and the doctors. He listens to them and learns something from all of them, but he never becomes one with them. And eventually, he's the only one, really, of the named characters who goes down to the war. He's the only one who, in that respect, makes himself at peace with the flat land. So I think his lightness, the idea that, as he says, yes, there are problems with humanity, but even so, it is magnificent. This idea that there's both things in each one of us, in a way, and that we don't really know which of the, well, probably many, more than two things, but we don't know which one of those is in control at any particular time.
Exactly. Sorry, exactly.
No, go ahead.
Being about more than these two perspectives. I mean, when we go back to the classical understanding of irony, so irony has a standard meaning explained in a typical dictionary entry modeled on Quintilian way of speech whose meaning is contrary to its words.
One part of Quintilian, not all of them.
But the speaker means something else, usually the opposite. But in your work, irony seems to be more than a figure of speech, and its poetic use is not limited to literary works. Irony can be a whole philosophy of life. So what is hidden? What is hidden in irony that makes you think of it as a toolkit for
well, I wouldn't call it a toolkit. It's an attitude, right? It's an attitude that springs from the sense that things are much more complicated than we think, that we never can know anything fully, but that we still have to go on. It's almost like Beckett's famous, I have to go on, I can't go on, I will go on. It's that sort of thing. It's also another way to look at it is that irony is pessimistic, but in a very specific sense of pessimism, not in the sense that everything is getting worse. That kind of pessimism is the other side of optimism, because both think that history has a kind of logic, has a kind of built-in way of going, and either it goes up or it goes down. I think pessimism is better thought of as not knowing what will happen, radical contingency, so that you have to be prepared, however difficult it is, and I tell you it's very difficult, to not project the present into the future. Not simply, anyway. But here I am, I believe this to the depths of my soul, and yet I keep planning. And I was thinking about it with the COVID, right? With the pandemic. No one was expecting it. I mean, there were ideas that there will be some pandemic someday, but nobody was expecting it. And all of a sudden, it hits everybody. And we all go around saying, oh my God, we never expected that to happen. And then now that it's going away, we're going to fall back and expect things to continue as they are now until the next catastrophe. So the only thing we can be certain about is that the next catastrophe will find us unprepared. Because a catastrophe, by definition, is that which you haven't prepared for, in a way, that you're not ready to face. So that's where irony, I think, comes into the everyday. It's the idea that, there are no clear answers, and sometimes you have to act even if you don't have a clear answer.
Right.
That's very different from a certain conception of philosophy that looks at it as the final say on what the world is like. Whether it's the metaphysical structure of the world or the moral structure of the world or whatever.
And I think this ethical attitude excavated from irony is in your book titled as concealment. There is something concealed, right? Like there is something hidden. I mean, even in terms of Socrates, so you don't know actually.
Well, what's hidden is that you don't know what he thinks, right? If I was talking to Socrates, I've often said that if I had been a contemporary, I probably would have voted against him in the trial, because I think he could be very obnoxious. There's no question about it. But the idea is that if I were talking to him, I would very probably believe that he knew the answers. Because someone who can ask questions so cleverly and can get people to contradict themselves, as Socrates does, you'd think does it because he already has the answer, which is what law professors do. But so Socrates is a darkness for his interlocutor, for the person he talks to. What I think is, in addition to that, is that he's a darkness to himself. And that's where I think I differ from most everyone who's working on Socratic thinking, is that he doesn't know the answer. And that's what makes him interesting for me. In other words, I think of Socrates as a blank slate in a way, as Plato has produced them, on which people can write their own script. You see. And the Greeks did it. I mean, except, as I said, the Epicureans. Everybody else, including the Aristotelians, thought that their school that Socrates was the originator of the school. It's an amazing thing.
Right.
Even the academy itself, Plato's own school, it first turns skeptic, namely, we don't know anything, then turns dogmatist, and then turns another kind of skepticism again. And yet they're thinking of themselves as always being Socratic, ultimately. You see, that's amazing. Right. Very few people have been able to accomplish that kind of universal portrait that says so little. And Jesus Christ is clearer than Socrates.
Right. I think we can talk about it when it comes to Kierkegaard, probably. But the thing is that I hope I'm not moving that fast to another question, because I also want to have
not at all, please.
Synthesis of your like generally. You have also written on beauty widely. I also listened to some of your lectures and read some of your.
Welcome. You honor me.
So, don't you think it's very haphazard intuition, but don't you think that there is a relationship, not perhaps immediately logical, between beauty and irony? I mean,
of course,
what made me think of it?
You're absolutely right.
This, I mean, what made me think of it was that first, there is seduction inherent in both, and more important than that for me is that disinterestedness in both of them. And even another reason, thirdly, for me is that beauty and symmetry can vary according to contexts. And to make it extremely short, irony is a way to recontextualize beauty.
Well, I probably want to hear more about this last sentence of yours, but let me say first that the connection that I often see between beauty and irony is that beauty promises, as I see it, something to us. When we see a beautiful object or a beautiful person, when we find it beautiful, in other words, when we are attracted to them, we have a sense that everything will be better for us and for them if we join in some way or another. If we spend time together, if I study the work, if whatever. So beauty promises me that there's more beautiful stuff than I've seen already. But maybe not. It's not a promise that always holds, right? And in fact, as I get to know the beautiful object, as long as I find it beautiful, I still think I don't know it fully. We never know it fully. So beauty always draws us a little further. Our relationship with a beautiful object or a person is always incomplete. On the other hand, there is an element of deception in beauty. The deception is that it promises good things, but doesn't always deliver them. And sometimes it delivers bad things.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have a visitor.
The
Not
cat is
really.
deceiving
Not
us
really.
with its beauty.
So there's a slight difference that you can't rely on the promise that beauty gives you. For me, there are two classical cases of this. One is in Proust. It's Swann, after years and years and years of suffering about Odette and being jealous and this and that and the other, when he finally says, how did I do that? Why did I spend all these years of my life for a woman who wasn't even my type? Pas mon genre, which is even harder than style or whatever. And the other is even worse, because as you engage with something that you're attracted to, and if that object or person is harmful to you, your own standards may have changed, and you don't see the harm that you have suffered. So you can be happy living a degraded life, at least degraded by the standards that you had before you involved yourself with that thing. For me, the best example of that is not a person, it's television. And I talked about it in the book.
Right.
What happens when you get to like television? If you start out thinking, well, television is for stupid people, and then you end up liking it, have you become stupid, or were you stupid before when you thought that only stupid people see television? And it's not clear who can answer that question, you see, or on what basis do you answer it? My view is that you usually answer it from the outside. The third person only can tell. So that's those two ways in which beauty, I think, is a bit more deceitful than irony, because irony too can mislead you, right? In other words, I may not know the answer, but you may think I know the answer, attribute it to me, and then act on it and destroy yourself. So maybe they're not quite as different as I started out saying. But you're very right to connect the two together. And I think that is something that I myself didn't realize until afterwards, not while I was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the last element that I was perhaps like, it was not completely reflected, just what I sort of expressed was that, I mean, irony has this ability of reframing morality. Irony has this ability to say that the ethics is not completed, is not completely fulfilled.
It's not tied down, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's also there that I can say that there is another similarity to this disinterestedness, through this distance that it can take.
But is there disinterestedness? I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure I quite agree with Kant on that. I mean, what Kant says is that it's disinterested in that it doesn't have to do with something attractive or likable, like wine, and that it's not moral. Now, let's think of the wine for a moment. It turns out, I think, that wine was not very important for Kant. But if you are a connoisseur, you're not going to just say, I like it or I don't like it. You're going to treat the wine the way that a literary critic treats a literary text. So what Kant, I think, ultimately is driving at there is not that some things are below contempt, so to speak, and they don't measure up. Is that the things that I'm interested in are the things that I react to as beautiful. And the things that I'm not interested in, I don't pay attention to. Also, say which wine, well, wine is different, but let's say take ice cream. It doesn't really matter to the person, the kind of person you are, whether you like chocolate or vanilla ice cream. I'm not saying that there couldn't be a person like that. I'm saying that by and large, people don't care that much. They don't think that the ice cream they like defines them as persons. So the debate over ice cream is not an interesting one. So, you like this? I like that. But if you're an ice cream maker,
and you sell ice cream, you're going to have a
True.
very different attitude.
Right.
So about morality. Yes, when you evaluate something aesthetically, you don't immediately at least think about its moral quality. But in fact, works of art do push us into various directions that affect our morality.
Mhm.
Now, it may not mean that its aesthetic value, the work's aesthetic value, so to speak, diminishes because the moral content is not right. But the moral content is there, and when I'm faced with a work that I love but I find extremely disturbing, then I have a disturbing conflict. What do I do with that? Do I continue to like it, believing that as I like it, I might be moved towards its moral world? Or do I say, I don't want to look at it anymore because it'll make me a worse person? Again, I think there's no general answer to that. Right?
Sure. A part of the book, actually a part of one of the lives that have been fashioned through this Socratic relation is Montaigne, right? I mean,
Right.
one of the characters that you have chosen. So, I mean, I have a sentence from one of his essays. So Montaigne says, "If man were wise, he would gauge the truth worth of anything by its usefulness and appropriatedness to his life." End of quote. It seems that for Montaigne, a virtuous ordinary life, striving for wisdom, but not far from folly, is achievement enough. When it comes to Montaigne, I think the issue at work is avoidance from tragedy, both morally and generically. According to one of the Montaigne commentators I was reading recently, Alison Calhoun, she says that heroic lives, I'm quoting her, heroic lives were far too entrenched within the codified world of public moral values to provide room for the new individualized subjects in his private and domestic sphere. End of quote. So, what I want to highlight here is that there is something, if not comic, banal, there is some banalité there. There is something trivial in Montaigne that makes the sort of convince me that Montaigne is a little, even, I mean, from Nietzsche, it's different, like for me, Montaigne is not that much tragic. He goes to the surface, as Deleuze would say, he stays on the surface. He's not that much profound, like going to the profundity of tragedy in Dionysus and so on and so forth. So that was, this ordinariness, this triviality.
Well, yes, ordinariness, but what kind of ordinariness is Montaigne talking about? The ordinariness of somebody who can write those essays. So he says, I stopped being a, mayor and this and that, and I went to my study, and I tell how things change, not how things are, and I'm the subject of my book and all that. But what he's trying to show is that, in a sense, what he's trying to show is let me put it another way. There are readers who think that what he's trying to show is that he is ultimately a simple man, as you are suggesting now, and that what really matters is to live that simple life. I want to say something else. I want to say that what he's doing is engaging his readers the way he would have engaged Etienne de la Boétie if La Boétie was still alive. And in engaging them that way, he is trying to make them be a bit like himself. Because remember what he says about La Boétie and their friendship. We were one soul in two bodies. Right? If you react to Montaigne in what I think and what he would think is the right way, because he says, I don't learn by example. I don't learn by example. I learn by contradiction, or something like that. Right? In other words, what you have to learn from Montaigne is to be like him, but that doesn't mean you have to copy him, right? It's I use that example somewhere. I'm not sure it's in the book, but suppose that you wanted to make a great painting,
and you're studying with me, and I'm your teacher. And you come and you say, teacher, how can I make a great painting? And after laughing a lot, I say, okay, here, and I show you a Rembrandt self-portrait. What are you supposed to do? Well, you can copy it, right? And then you've painted like Rembrandt, but you failed. The only way you can imitate Rembrandt on the right level is to, if you're lucky and if you're talented and if everything works out, to spend a lifetime working and make great paintings, which by definition will not look like Rembrandt because they'll be expressing you rather than someone else, right? So Nietzsche has a wonderful little dialogue where A asks B, says, what, you want no disciples? And B says, no, I want everybody to fashion their own example as I do. And I think that's where Montaigne plays. That's the space.
Exactly. I mean, what I wanted to shed light on, or just like sort of underscore here, is that the distinction that I can see sometimes between the amount of, I don't say even abundance of folly and idiocy that convinces me that in Montaigne there is more humor than irony than in Nietzsche.
Oh, there's not very much irony in Montaigne. No, I don't think so. You're right about that.
Yeah, so
you're right. But it's Socratic irony that allows him to use Socrates as his model.
Okay.
See, that's what. So we absolutely. I'm not saying that all those reflections of Socrates.
But
repeat the irony.
Right, exactly. But this repetition again is different in Nietzsche than and Foucault than in Montaigne, because Nietzsche can also transmit this irony to the reader again, like, you know, what he's inherited, he can transmit to me. But in Montaigne, what he has transmitted, what he has inherited, is transmitted more as humor to me. You know, he has transmitted Socratic irony, but what
I think that's right. I think, you know, there's no irony in Montaigne. Irony has an edge. You see it in Socrates, you see it in Nietzsche.
Exactly.
That Montaigne and even Foucault doesn't have quite at the same level as those other two. You see,
which makes
that's why I think Nietzsche is so close to Socrates.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why sometimes I think that I need more Montaigne sometimes. All right, so it's more lighthearted than at least from my.
Think about Montaigne. Think about Montaigne in connection with Descartes. They both start writing a memoir. Descartes tells you in the Meditations, he's sitting at his desk, he has that ball of wax, he sees people walking about, there's a fire, and the more and more he thinks, the less individual he becomes. So that at the end, he's speaking for the mind, right?
Absolutely.
It's exactly the opposite from Montaigne.
Absolutely.
Who gets more and more specific. Both those are views of what a human being is like. But they are exactly opposite. And I think they should be, to some extent, brought together. You know, but it's so what Montaigne is doing, he is articulating in the most imaginative way what it is to be a distinctive individual.
True.
Descartes is describing what it is to be a human being with the power of reason.
Right.
Neither of them is absolutely right in that sense, but you can see that those two conceptions of what a human being is, the one that says individuality and the other that says identity. And the identity eventually gets to base moral and political thought, which applies equally to everybody, and the individuality ends up supporting beauty, which is different for every person. So I think there is a kind of... I'm retired, I just retired, so I can't teach this course on Descartes and Montaigne that I've always wanted to teach. You know? The two beginnings of the modern person, you know.
So I go forward to another quote from Goethe.
Sure.
So I just read that, and I would be happy if you just can elaborate on that, because you also mentioned in the book. So Goethe once wrote, he who would explain to us when men like Plato spoke in earnest, when in jest and half jest, when they wrote from conviction, and what merely for the sake of the argument would certainly render us as an extraordinary service and contribute greatly to our education. End of quote. I find it really interesting because, well, actually, I wrote my PhD on humor and the relation between humor and
whom did you read on that? Did you read Bergson and laughter and things like that?
I read Bergson and also Kierkegaard. I mean, especially the concluding remarks. I mean, the late Kierkegaard, let's say. And also, like, the contemporary sense of it was sort of crystallized in Deleuze. Perhaps I just projected on Deleuze. There is no clear, But anyway, I find it interesting that there are some writers. We have it also in the Persian poetry. I mean, like, there's sometimes it's really difficult to say that this person is talking in airs, or it's like jocular and jesting, So, and you found it in this Greek figure. You found it in Socrates, and Goethe is saying that if somebody can tell us, it is clear, it is clearly serious, and it is clearly not serious. He has done a very great service to us.
Well, I don't think it's a project that could ever be successful. So I agree with everything that comes before he will render us a great service. But, I was thinking about that just yesterday. I was thinking how difficult it is for me. I mean, I spent a lifetime reading Plato. It's very difficult for me to form an image of who Plato was. I have no idea what he was like. I mean, we have his letters, or people say that they're his letters. Some are, probably some are not. He is, whereas Socrates is a fully three-dimensional character. You can imagine talking to him. What would it be like to talk to Plato? No idea. He really has remained an enigma. He's the ultimate enigma, I think, even more than Socrates, because he's the one who did it all, and that's the amazing thing. And we know, not we know so little in the sense that we have few facts. I think even if we had more facts, we still wouldn't know, because of the way that he wrote. You see, it's an amazing accomplishment when you think about it. To be one of the most read people in the world and to be a complete mystery, as a character. Yeah.
What I like in the project, in the book actually, is the fact that you're talking about through this concealment, you're also talking about some sort of silence in this character. Socrates' life is like I'm quoting, it's like a magnificent pause. It's a quote from Kierkegaard, it's from the concept of irony. Again, Socrates' life is like a magnificent pause in the course of history. We don't hear him at all. A profound stillness prevails until it is broken by the noisy attempts of the many and different schools of followers to trace their origin in this hidden and cryptic source. End of quote. Again, it is from Kierkegaard, the concept of irony. Do you think that in order to be loyal to irony, in order to repeat irony in its different forms, one should first learn to listen? I mean, the German word I like is zuhören.
Zuhören, yeah, sure.
Right.
Why would you have to learn that in order to be ironic? I mean, explain it to me. That sounds interesting, but I'm not sure I see the connection yet.
I think in the way you're analyzing Socratic irony, as you already mentioned, there is something concealed. There is something that you have to wait to listen to. There is some silence. Yeah, I'm not sure completely if your position is that it's like Baroque, it's like different layers, or it is some void, some silence that you have to wait for. But
no, it's not layers. I hate the image of layers in everything.
I guess so.
Except for cakes. Cakes, it's okay, but that's it.
I could imagine that you're avoiding that image. So there is some silence. There is some,
I agree with that.
right?
In fact,
In order to, I mean, there is a training, like in order for Foucault to relate himself to, yeah, to relate himself to that attitude, he should first of all be able to listen to. I don't want to go to the Heideggerian listening now, yeah, but
what you have to listen for is the silence, right?
Exactly.
Right.
You have to listen for that silence, you know, that kind of.
That I see the connection now.
Right.
Yeah. And also, you have to feel that silence yourself if you're going to be ironic. You see, because I think the vulgar Quintillian view, which has been sort of basic to treatments of irony, is it's too simple a picture of what a human being is. It's just too simple. We do many, many more things with language that we don't mean literally than produce the opposite of what we mean.
Absolutely. You know, I think that just in order to confirm that, sometimes when I hang out with people, we're just constantly exchanging information. I mean, it happens to me a lot here. Perhaps, I mean, in Berlin, perhaps more than what I experience in
I don't think so.
Everywhere. When I'm hanging out with those people who exchange constantly information, me, one of them, I mean, including me, I sometimes would be reminded of what you already said, that, you know, in order to be ironic, you need to carry some silence within you. You need to have some space,
right.
You know.
And you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah, and this space is
you have to be aware of it
for the care of the self. You know, like you can care through this space. You know, without this space, you can't care.
No, I think that's right. That it's nice. It's worth thinking more about connections between silence and irony. Yeah, that's a nice point.
Yeah. There is a part again. In the concept of irony, Kierkegaard says that what Socrates himself prized so highly, namely standing still and contemplating, in other words, silence, that is the whole life in terms of word history. He has left nothing by which a later age can judge him. End of quote. My question again here is that the role of Kierkegaard in your project, or his understanding of irony, especially because Kierkegaard highlights Socrates' role in tricking, if not deceiving, the whole world, including great tricksters.
Well, you have to be a sophist if you're going to beat the sophists. That's what he says. I'm not absolutely sure about that. I think that you sometimes do have to do it. I don't think that Plato gives Socrates invalid arguments. I mean, he may use invalid arguments sometimes, as we all do, but I don't think it is Kierkegaard's attitude that he does it consciously, because you need to bring somebody who's already in deception out of deception. You have to deceive them out of deception. I think that's sometimes true, but I don't think it's the Socratic way. And it could be that this is the reason why he wasn't ever successful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the things about, as I think I mentioned, the book is that he, as far as we know from the dialogues of Plato, he never convinces anybody of anything. A friend of mine in Greece, who's just written a book on the Meno, thinks that Meno becomes better because of Socrates.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not convinced. And what has happened after that? Plato comes in with the Republic, and he says, look, we need people like Socrates. We'll call them philosophers. And we need to have them in the city. But the only way to have them in the city is to prepare the citizens to be the right kind of citizens, to appreciate that kind of person. But by then, Plato has become a dogmatist. He believes in the theory of forms, he believes in all that, and he knows what he's going to teach people.
Right.
Which is very, very different. The question is, what would a society look like, or even would a society be possible in which we accepted that we never really know anything for sure?
True. Absolutely. Interesting.
That's a question that I have no idea how one should answer.
Again, because I was trying to have a kind of at least partly synthetic exchange with you. My last question is also addressing another work of yours, which is more on friendship. So, as the last question, it's on something you have already written about. I mean, although separately, namely friendship. So my point, or my question is, or my point in the question, inherent in the question is the instrumental.
Yeah, being very philosophical.
I've been paralyzed. The instrumental relationship, such as Aristotle's so-called utility and pleasure, philia, are not friendship in your opinion,
right,
in the modern sense. Or a good friendship, again, in your opinion, is a close friendship and not, contra Aristotle, a virtuous friendship necessarily.
That's right.
Or you say again that Montaigne was right, that we cannot give a complete explanation of why we love our friends. Anyhow, I was wondering the other day if irony is an exchange I mainly share with close friends. In other words, I don't necessarily share irony with virtuous friends.
If there are any virtuous people. Right. But that is extremely interesting. I'll tell you one, my immediate reaction is, if you're ironic with people you don't know and people who don't know you, they're going to hate you for it.
There would be sarcasm, at least. Yeah.
It becomes sarcasm, or it's interpreted as sarcasm, whatever. Whereas, in other words, in order to appreciate someone's irony, you have to know them, right? So to see how it fits with the rest of their self.
Or trust them, at least, right?
The same thing, trust them. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. I was, absolutely right. That's very interesting. Because how many times have I heard about somebody, oh, that was so rude, he was being ironic. Yeah. But when I'm being ironic with my friends, either they laugh or they tell me you're being very rude, but they're laughing while they're telling me.
Yeah.
It's
and they're not the best of virtuous friends. It's not necessarily the virtuous ones.
You said close friends. It's true. I mean close friends, but I think there can be casual friends as well. What I don't want is to think of the utility and pleasure, philia, to be less close friendships, which is how they've been interpreted.
Absolutely.
And, you read the Nicomachean Ethics, and the single biggest topic is friendship or philia. And I believe that what those two chapters of the Nicomachean Ethics are a discussion of interpersonal relations. Absolutely. Which has not been done in the rest of the book. The rest of the book, with the exception of the discussion of justice, is all about how can I become virtuous. Right. This tells you how you should treat others.
Absolutely. And where I sensed it was that I sort of, again, coming back to the question of care, I think that it is also reflected in the friendship, like care of the self.
Oh, absolutely.
Can be constantly ping-ponged in the friendship.
That's what friendship does all the time.
Exactly.
I think. Yeah.
So the care of the self doesn't happen in the ivory tower of.
Of course not. Theoria, the Greek theory, doesn't happen in an abstract study. In the Symposium, Plato describes the ascent of the philosophic lover from a particular boy all the way to the form of the good or the beautiful, which seems to be very closely related to the good. All that is done in connection with discussion with other people. After all, the proof that the philosopher has seen the form of beauty is that he, let's stick with that pronoun, benefits the people who spend time with him. That's how you create works of great virtue, is by making the people good. You don't sit there grooving on the form of beauty, so to speak.
And that, I think, needs to be said again and again and again, because because of our own view that theory is a kind of thing that you do in your study. It's not true in the sciences, of course. They all work together all the time. Nobody works by himself. I mean, the days of Einstein and, jotting down an equation, it's gone. Now you have 800 people working on the same project. It's a social thing, knowledge. And ultimately so is wisdom.
Yeah, interesting.
That's
Thank
very,
you very
very
much.
nice.
That was a really wonderful exchange. I mean,
Well, those are terrific questions. I'm actually not just honored, I'm moved by the quality of the questioning. Seriously.
It's my pleasure.